In many ways, this desolate speck of land is one of the most intriguing islands on Earth. Blistering heat, incessant storms and a shark-infested reef have managed to secure its place as one of the DX world's most wanted. And though DXpeditions have come and gone, its reputation has always remained one of mystery, danger and fascination. But beyond the DX world lies an even more intriguing place. From cutthroats to kings, from pirates to presidents, over the years this has been the site of multiple murders, countless shipwrecks, and one spine-tingling tale of madness, starvation, and death. Twice occupied by America, claimed by Mexico, but ultimately owned by France, the true citizens of this tiny coral speck care little of their colonial heritage and viciously rule the sand like creatures from a black lagoon. Little wonder that nowhere else on Earth better captures the true magic of DXpeditioning than Clipperton. As with so many rare island DXCC entities, just getting there is usually the reason for its most wanted status. Over 1,000 kilometers from the nearest landfall, no airstrip, no dock, no shelter and no inhabitants, Clipperton is not exactly the most visited place on Earth. But with Mexican sunshine and warm Pacific waters ahead, the beautiful Sportfisher Shogun is the vessel of choice for this, the first big DX adventure of the new millennium.
Oftentimes I'm asked, why would someone be interested in going on an adventure like this?
Maybe because it's someplace lost on the Pacific. What seemed really intriguing to me was to be on this end of the pileup, and it's been my dream since getting back into radio.
DXpeditioning, it's really the ultimate challenge.
I like pileups, I like contests.
To sail the seas and go to places where not many people have been before.
Yeah, my dream come true.
Go along on the trip, Luca. Is that it? Over.
Yeah. Good morning, Mark. Nice to see you on the boat there on the way to Clipperton. The name is Luca, Lima Unit from Charlie Alpha.
Okay, Jerry, very good. WB9 Zulu from N9 November Sugar, stroke MM. Very good. I will pass that along to Jim. In my own case, it's fairly simple. This is a place, Clipperton Island, that has a very colorful and mysterious history. And in fact, when the first expedition in recent times went to Clipperton in 1978, I remember working them and learning a little bit about that history. In fact, one of the members of that original 1978 team is aboard with us today.
Well, it's that magic that I had to return. I'm looking very forward to go the second time to Clipperton. It's a terrible place. It's really awful, but it's magic.
It's a whole lot different than what we're used to. We're used to fishermen who are in themselves a totally different breed. You guys have brains, which is really nice for a change to have somebody to talk to that doesn't want to talk about killing fish. We have a weird sense of humor out here. I guess you haven't noticed yet, but you will. As soon as we get to the island, you can't get off. Are children going to see this?
Well, the excitement is building.
Yep, after what, 4 days now?
You can almost smell the island.
Oh yes, you definitely can smell it.
6.5 days at sea is a long time to be on a small boat. But for Captain Norm Kagawa, his Shogun is more like a home, and trips to Clipperton nothing new. To the team's benefit, his years of familiarity with the weather and waters around this island make him one of the most knowledgeable and experienced skippers available in the region. And though he may not show it, for Norm and everyone else on board, the first sighting of Clipperton after such a long voyage is always a thrilling moment. But for one passenger on the ship, Expedition Leader John Kennan, N7CQQ, this is especially exciting and the culmination of over a year of planning and preparation.
Beautiful place. Looks like I got a lot more sand than we had before. A lot more beach. That makes it nice. And the surf conditions are really nice as well.
Anchored off the island's southwestern shore, the next phase of this operation is extremely dangerous and one that has managed to foil the plans of many previous expeditions attempting to land. Deep water, huge ocean currents and a sharp underwater ridge rising up to the coral reef result in heavy surf almost year-round. On the advice of the captain, the southwestern side has the lightest surf in March and a narrow cut in the reef. The trick with landing through heavy breakers like this is to time the sets of waves and slip in during a lull. Once the last wave in a set starts its roll, the skiff driver will gun the engine as hard as it will go, hopefully making it through the surf and over the reef before the next set arrives. Once over the reef, the skiff crew will position themselves within a few meters of the cut, then slowly walk the Zodiac through the narrow 5-foot opening and up onto the beach. Safe reef landings on remote, unprotected mid-ocean islands like this require skill and practice. History has proven that Clipperton is one of the toughest islands to get into or out of, and it will take many trips to completely unload the expedition's gear and build a camp on this barren, blazing hot island. Clipperton as a de-expedition destination goes back almost half a century, back to the days when such endeavours were not nearly as common as they are now. The first major assault on Clipperton was in 1954 by FO0AAA. With a car full of equipment sponsored by Helicrafters, Bob and his gang drove from their homes in the Midwest down to Acapulco to catch a boat that would hopefully have them on the air as FO0AAA in a few days. But bad luck was to plague this trip from the beginning. A broken sextant and navigation problems on their first ship forced them to turn back for Acapulco without ever reaching the island. A second schooner they chartered barely managed to limp to Clipperton, having to suffer through intense storms, torn sails, broken generators, leaky hulls, and an eventual undignified tow from the Mexican Navy. Upon reaching Clipperton, the bad luck continued with capsized canoes, close shaves with sharks, unstable generators, and worst of all, orders from the Mexicans to QRT after barely 30 hours on airtime. As it so often does on Clipperton, bad luck got the best of a good team, and the entire 20-day grueling affair produced a scant 1,108 QSOs. In 1955, Englishman Danny Wheel, VP2VB, sailing around the world, showed up on Clipperton briefly in the third generation of the famous Yasmi ships. Using the call FO0AAA, his stay caused quite a stir, but hardly made a dent in worldwide demand for this most wanted country. It wasn't until 1958, when Hams tagged along as part of the Scripps Institute expedition, that Clipperton came alive again as FO0AAT, sponsored partly by the San Diego DX Club. This mostly scientific trip was part of the International Geophysical Year to study the ecology of Clipperton. A long time passed before the next assault took place, and finally in 1978 a large-scale de-expedition took to the airwaves using the call signs FO0XA through XH. This mostly French-Swiss effort qualified as the island's first mega-pedition, and the almost 30,000 QSOs taking place near the peak of Cycle 21 managed to knock Clipperton substantially down on the wanted lists. But in the late 70s, the lure of Clipperton and the sport of de-expeditioning was not confined to just adventure-seeking hams. Inspired by the island and its de-expedition mystique, the old Dentron Corporation of Ohio joined the fun and produced one of amateur radio's most famous products, the Clipperton L amplifier, one of the few amateur radio products whose advertising campaign and name was based entirely on de-expedition legend. A large-scale de-expedition tried again in 1985, and despite successfully making it to the vicinity of Clipperton, the team spent days circling around the reef trying to find a safe way through the treacherous surf. Eventually making it ashore, this team pulled off an impressive 31,000 QSOs as FO0XX, mostly with the Americas and Japan. On departure, the dangerous surf again proved tough to breach, and for 3 days the team waited patiently for a break. On arrival in San Diego, the exhausted team vowed never to return. But a year later, FO0XX roared alive again, hoping to concentrate more on Europe, which had missed out in '85 due to poor band conditions. With better surf conditions than solar ones, and barely 5 operating days on the island, the team managed another 16,500 QSOs, but still not as many Europeans as they had hoped for. With demand in Europe rising steadily, a new Clipperton operation, FO0CI, finally got underway in 1992 after 2 years of intense planning. The 9 operators pulled off almost 50,000 QSOs in 10 days, easily satisfying demand worldwide and once again bringing Clipperton down off the wanted lists. Though the curse of Clipperton did not show up, the French Navy did, and paid a rather startling visit to the team on their last day of operation.
In 1992, when we did FO0CI, there was a bunch of guys that just got together. Only one of us had been on an expedition before. That was JW2IJ. We came to Clipperton not having any idea what to expect. I came back now to Clipperton with a lot of information from what I was experienced before. Came back with a lot of tools, a lot of equipment, and probably packed too much stuff.
Too much stuff can be a blessing or a curse, especially in a place where easy offloading of a ship can be tricky. Assembly of tents, antennas and a simple power network to each campsite will take at least a day and a half to complete, so a tri-bander and a walk beam for each mode site, plus an array of verticals seems to be enough for the moment.
Clipperton Island, when I first set foot here, I said, this looks great. And immediately I heard somebody else say, this is nothing, you know, and they didn't like it. Also the people who had been here before.
When I set foot on the island, I didn't really know what to expect. I've read all the books that I could get my hands on. I've read about this guano thing, but I've never seen any guano, so I didn't know what to expect. Now I'm living in guano.
The group that I tagged up with has just been absolutely wonderful, helping out, taking charge of the CW camp, scheduling.
I was impressed that everyone got along without a couple fist fights because things were tense a time or two, but everybody handled it quite well.
Telescope and pushed up. Yeah. They're not designed.
Well, frankly, I think if you cut it off right here, straighten out, we can raise it this way.
Yeah.
And we got room to push there.
Telescope it as far as it will go, so you can reach it easier with the ladder, because you'll be pushing that top section first.
Yes.
High-speed construction of a large multi-band de-expedition campsite is back-breaking work, especially in less than ideal conditions of extreme heat, sand and wind. At barely a few kilometres in diameter, Clipperton is the only coral atoll in the northeastern Pacific. As little as 20 metres at its narrowest point and 300 metres at its widest, this small, low-lying ring of packed coral and guano is just above sea level and almost completely invisible to passing ships during the rainy season. Though it may look like a tropical paradise from some angles, there are actually relatively few trees on Clipperton. These coconut palms were human-introduced and originate to a pair that was planted during the 19th century guano mining days. Many more were retransplanted to various other parts of the island in 1958 by the Scripps expedition, and today, scattered small clusters of palms give Clipperton its classic desert island look. The expedition's camp lies on the southwestern side of the island and comprises two main sections, SSB and CW, separated by 400 metres. Both have yagis for 20 metres and up, with SSB having multi-band extras for RIDI and 6 metres, and CW hosting low-band verticals for 30 and up. A few metres from the skiff landing site is the SSB camp. In typical field day style, these operators managed to cope with the extreme heat and dust that Clipperton is notorious for. The SSB QSOs are rolled out from 4 expedition-ready ICOM 756 Pros at an extraordinary pace, hitting over 7,000 per day at peaks and averaging 5,000 even after 4 days.
Victor Bravo, Victor Bravo.
Victor Bravo, 5 and 9.
Okay, thank you. It's Foxtrot 6, Bravo, Victor Bravo. Florida 6, Bravo, Victor Bravo, 59.
Foxtrot 6, Bravo, Victor Bravo. Thank you. Indian Yankee Charlie, 5 and 9.
Roger, you're 5 and 9, New Mexico. Kilowatt 5, Yankee Charlie.
K5 YC, thanks.
The SSB tent also doubles as the RIDI tent, with Doug N6TQS taking on a full-time role as the team's dedicated digital mode guru. RIDI and other digital modes are often neglected totally or placed as a low priority on major de-expeditions, something that is a constant source of frustration to the ever-growing ranks of RIDI fans. And just to his side is the team's full-time 6-metre station, which stays active for as many hours of the day as possible by the team's VHF master, Koji, JK7TKE. About 8 minutes walk north is the CW site, which also houses the team's main sleeping area due to the reduced noise. Heavy antenna work and 3 3-hour shifts daily over 7 days is a tough regimen for even the most experienced de-expeditioner, and despite irregular hours, heat, crabs and dust, very few have trouble sleeping.
camps kind of drew into two factions, the CW fellas and the phonies. It's been a good team. I was so impressed about the number of contacts, for like 14,000 in one day with essentially 4 stations. That's just unbelievable numbers. And it's been pretty, high, above 10,000 every day. We just have really quality operators here as far as making contacts and digging into the pileups.
The people that I have met on these kinds of trips are just the best. Not a lot of egos, not a lot of chips on their shoulders. I guess I've been very fortunate, and most of the people I've been on these trips with have just been nice folks. Well, I've been looking forward to coming to Clipperton for some time. I don't know why. It's always kind of had a special mystique for me. I was talking to one of the other operators about that special mystique. He said, I don't know, maybe it goes back to the old Dentron days when they had that Clipperton L amplifier named after the island. The last major expedition that I was on was about 3 years ago, BK0IR to Heard Island. That took about 6 weeks out of my life. This trip, I'll be gone from home 3 weeks, and the truth of the matter is this is a long time to be away. But if you're going to be away, I can't think of a more exciting thing to do with people that have just become great, great friends.
There aren't very many clues on Clipperton to tell a visitor that they have just arrived in France. But over on the northwestern side of the island is the only reminder that this is indeed French soil. A lone flagpole where the tricolour is symbolically raised by the French Navy a few times a year. A strange reminder to the birds, the crabs, and anyone else who might be watching of who's boss on Clipperton. The beautiful coconut grove that sits adjacent to this monument shelters some other interesting ruins. The French campsite of Bougainville, last occupied in 1967. Though not much is left, tucked away under these palms are the decaying remains of the only French outpost that ever existed in the North Pacific Ocean. The fact that Clipperton Island is even a possession of France represents a peculiar chapter of European colonial claims in the Americas, a story that began hundreds of years ago and only resolved in 1935. Clipperton may be a name that conjures up classic images of desert island de-expeditioning, but in 1705 the name was associated with a more sinister character, John Clipperton, an English pirate who used these waters as a staging base for raiding trans-Pacific merchant ships. Though it's doubtful he ever landed here, the buccaneer's name stuck, much to the annoyance of France, who had the more romantic L'Île de Passion in mind. Though no hard evidence exists, re-examined maps and records now suggest the great explorer Magellan may have been the first to actually sight the island in 1521 when he made his great round-the-world journey. It would be nearly 200 years later, however, before a passing French ship in 1711 would become the first to actually record a verifiable sighting in a ship's log. Though the first known human landing on the island was in 1825 by an American mariner from New York, it wasn't until the 1850s that the island's potential for phosphate mining brought it into the international spotlight. Napoleon III of France immediately sent an official emissary to claim Clipperton in 1858, fearing that his cross-channel rival Victoria would do the same. But due to the dangerous surf, the French flag was never actually raised, and upon returning home, Napoleon's representative admitted he never even landed on Clipperton or properly proclaimed the island as French territory. With no actual French flag flying, the next attempt at ownership was by the Oceanic Phosphate Company of San Francisco, who tried to claim Clipperton in the name of the United States using the Guano Islands Act of 1853. Despite the country's tremendous interest in phosphate mining, Washington was not convinced and dismissed the miners' claim without merit, especially since the quality of phosphate produced from Clipperton was marginal at best. Though their political impact may have been minimal, American guano miners were to have a profound ecological impact, planting the island's first trees in 1897 and letting loose 2 pigs that were rescued from a shipwreck. Despite the miners' strong presence and America's official disinterest, international arguments over ownership did not cease for many years and at times brought some nations dangerously close to conflict. By the early 1900s, it was only France and Mexico that insisted on pursuing their claims to Clipperton. Not one to give up easily, Mexico's Huerta government raised the stakes in 1906 by constructing a lighthouse on Clipperton Rock and later sending a small army garrison to occupy and defend their claim. It would take 22 years of royal indecision before Clipperton was finally awarded to France, who formally took possession in 1935.
Okay, Echo Alpha 3, Bravo Mike Zulu, 59. It's Echo Alpha 2, Bravo Mike Zulu.
Propagation, one of the things we're studying here, has just been absolutely fabulous. This time, in about 3 days, we've almost equaled the number of QSOs that we operated in 1992.
Okay, Radio Juliet again. Oscar Hotel 9, Radio Japan, 509, QSL. 783. LA Zulu 3, Alpha Sierra Bravo, 509.
When we came here, I think that we understood that the Europeans were quite interested in a contact. I think it ranked number 6, most needed in Europe. And of course, our major goal was to make a lot of European contacts. In fact, we had some meetings on the boat where we talked about the fact that there are really 3 Europes, and propagation to each of the 3 Europes was different, and we discussed that, and we trained, and we were pretty prepared. Now, what we weren't prepared for is the fact that conditions have been excellent.
Delta Lima 7, India Ocean, 509. The Sugar Popper 7, India Whiskey Alpha, you're 509, QSL. Thanks. Listening up 5 to 10. Echo Alpha 5, Delta Papa something, 509. Echo Alpha 5, Delta Papa Foxtrot, thanks.
Foxtrot, Kilo 59. Echo Alpha 5, Florida, Kilo Hot X-ray, thank you. QRZ Europe, 500, 510.
I think the solar flux has been in excess of 200 for most of our stay here, and the Europeans have been loud, loud, loud. In fact, oftentimes they are as loud and sometimes louder than the much closer USA stations.
Papa Charlie, give me your call again. Roger, India, Kilo 7, Whiskey Papa Charlie, you're 5 by 9. Thank you. The Oscar Hotel 59. November, Victor, Victor again. November, Juliet, Victoria, thank you. No, Oscar Hotel 3, Nancy, Juliet, Victor, QRZ, Europe.
I think we've worked into all areas of Europe. We were concerned about Scandinavia, but we've got a lot of OHs, a lot of SMs, a lot of LAs in the log. And I just hope that on their end they feel that we've done a good job of working them, because we certainly have made that a priority and feel very, very good about our results.
Oscar Hotel 1, Mexico, Mexico. Oscar Hotel 1, 59. Oscar Hotel 1, Alpha, Alpha, you're 59, roger. Oscar Hotel 1, Alpha, Alpha, 59, QRZ, Europe.
The surf here on Clipperton is one of the major safety concerns of the guys operating on the boats. They have to get across the reef and into the beach safely each time they come in. They need two boats, one for the food and one for a safety factor to have a crew member on. The food arrives at the phone camp, we eat, and then it heads on down to the CW camp, and the guys down there are fed. The cooks are just absolutely fabulous. They will not let us get by with not eating. Crabs, when we're sitting here eating, they come right up to us. They're not very aggressive. If you move your foot towards them, they take off and head in a different direction, look for some place to hide. But if you throw some food down, that's the perfect thing for them. They'll pick it up and eat it. If you throw out a big piece of food, there'll be a large pileup, and it can't be broken by the best DXer. We did put up some crab fences. This was something that W2IJ came up with last time. They worked out again very well this time. We occasionally get a crab or two that gets inside, but we pick them up and send them on their way.
You can't stand still for more than 5 minutes, at least at night, without a couple crabs crawling on your feet, nibbling on your toes or your shoes. There are handy scavengers, though, because if you drop any paper or lose any debris around, they eat it, and you don't have to go around policing up the campsite so well.
They're really quite docile, and I wouldn't say friendly necessarily, but it's not like they run up and take a bite out of you or anything like that. They're just curious, and then when you scoot them away with your foot or something like that, they just go off in another direction. But they are everywhere, and they're this very strange orange color, and they start coming out when the day starts cooling off, and you can look out across the beach, and all you see is this like an orange blanket that's covering the land. It's really quite spectacular.
If you've grown up in the Southern California or San Diego area and did anything on the beach, you know that the waves are timed. There's a sequence of waves, either 3 or 4, and then there's a lull, and then there's another what they call set of 3 or 4. And what the guys in the boats are trying to do is time the set to when they have the quiet surf. When they leave, they have to pick the last wave that comes in of that set, head back out across the reef, and then hope they get to the edge of the reef and into open ocean before the next set starts breaking.
At midday, temperatures can reach well over 45 degrees Celsius on Clipperton, which explains why the ubiquitous red land crab becomes rather scarce during this time, preferring to sleep the hot hours in any shade they can find. This crab has become an icon of Clipperton, and hardly an expeditioner returns without stories of the hideous crustaceans that seem to infest the island at every corner. Though other species of crab do live on the island and can occasionally be found, their numbers are insignificant compared to their orange relatives, who, aside from microorganisms, outnumber just about every other living being. The Clipperton crab is certainly not built for speed. Evolved more for agility, defense, and multiple senses, he makes a superb scavenger and a remarkably excellent digger. When midday shelter is not readily available, a new home can be dug out of the sand in a matter of minutes. The volume of sand that can be moved in proportion to its body weight is quite amazing, but understandably hard work under the scorching tropical sun. With so many millions of these creatures living on such a small island, clashes are common, especially when lazier crabs attempt to steal a home rather than build their own. But when the shadows grow long and the island begins to cool off, their visibility increases rapidly, almost exponentially, turning the ground an eerie shade of orange as the day comes to a close. Living in such numbers and on such a barren island with an extremely limited amount of food means that the search for even the smallest scrap can be intense. Crabs will eat just about anything that contains even a trace of fresh organic matter. Grass once covered a good portion of Clipperton Island, reaching its peak in 1958, when human-introduced pigs from a shipwreck still roamed the island, keeping the crab population in check. In fact, Clipperton looked radically different 40 years ago, lush, green and tropical, with relatively few crabs at all. But after a lone member of the 1958 expedition decided to exterminate every pig, reasoning that the pigs were killing the island's bird life, the remaining and likely better evolved crab population exploded again and Clipperton returned to its original bare coral state. The only remaining greenery at ground level today is a fast-growing variety of weed that exists only against the edge of the lagoon, a place where crabs can be seen gouging themselves daily. Nothing edible is ever left to waste, and even this unfortunate bird will be eaten to nothing, bones, feathers and all. Even the paper label on a discarded water bottle can become a meal. The coconut trees are relatively safe from the wrath of the crabs, partly due to their poor climbing skills, but any fresh coconut that falls on the ground will cause a grotesque feeding frenzy. Often mistaken as the white sails of a distant ship, the 62-foot-high Clipperton Rock stands out from miles away. Known to most visitors as just the Rock, this volcanic remnant of a powerful explosion is nothing more than a very odd-looking blob of trachyte, with the remains of an old lighthouse on top. But a pleasant place it is not. For 2 years, this was a house of terror, a place where women and children were indiscriminately murdered, raped, beaten and tortured at the whim of a madman, their screams for mercy unheard. No hope of escape, no hope of rescue. For 2 years, this was the heart of the Clipperton curse. The Mexican settlement arrived here in 1908 to maintain a new lighthouse and stake a claim from France. Joining the few remaining miners from America, 30 people in all came ashore, including a commander, a group of soldiers, their families, and a lighthouse keeper. Little did they know that revolution would come to Mexico only a few years later, and they would all be branded traitors of the old regime and left to die. For a long time, the brave but foolish head of this small contingent, Captain Ramon Arnaud, refused to accept that his community had been abandoned. One by one, the stubborn Mexicans died of scurvy and starvation. Graves began to outnumber living beings, but even then, the nightmare was only just beginning. The day the last soldier and Captain Arnaud himself died in a hopeless dash for rescue, the lightkeeper, the only adult male left on Clipperton, came down from his hut at the foot of Clipperton Rock and declared himself king of the island. In total control of the only remaining survivors, the women and children, his brutal reign of terror knew no bounds. Any woman who put up a struggle was viciously beaten. Any woman who refused outright was executed along with her children. The insanity was to last until July 18th, 1917, when he was finally overpowered with a hammer by this woman, one of his captives. In a strange twist of timing, within minutes of his gruesome execution, the USS Yorktown appeared at Clipperton on routine patrol for enemy ships. Under the command of Captain Harlan Page Perrell, the survivors were immediately rescued off the island, but their almost animal-like condition and subsistence living shocked the crew. But the real, true horror of the incident only became known when the ship's navigator went ashore to inspect the huts and came across the keeper's freshly killed body. The full story was eventually told, but to spare the survivors more humiliation, Captain Perrell wisely decided to omit the incident from his report and keep their terrible ordeal secret. An action he knew would risk wartime court-martial should it ever be revealed. Today, on the southern side of the rock, only a few traces of the evil Lightkeeper's hut still survive. Here was the place the madman ran his 2-year rule of terror, and here was the place he was finally executed, a secret held tight by a compassionate Navy commander for almost 20 years.
When the pileup is enormous like this, you can, it's almost impossible to get full calls out, although you try. But if you want to keep the rate up, you just go whatever you can hear. You can grab 2 or 3 letters, you take them and give a report out. I don't think there is much you can do about it. Numbers in CW, I don't believe in it. You just pick out what you can hear. I've been, in the beginning, trying to work or call Europe separately. I've only done it once, and I didn't feel like it was necessary doing it. The Europeans were getting through.
The pileups were just totally horrendous. I tried different approaches and I learned quite a few things. One of the things I was concerned about using real tight filters, and after listening and watching a couple of the guys here, they talked about using wide filters so you can filter in your head, and I found that did work a lot better. So I find myself opening up the filters and listening to what's on the outer edges. It was so rare to get a full call. You get so many partials that it was very difficult to get full call signs, but it's been very exciting working the big files.
Clipperton Island, and its location here is pretty remote. You can tell by looking at the beach and on the island itself, the atoll. There's garbage from boats that have gone by or just have floated through on the ocean, anywhere from shoes to lots and lots of bottles, light bulbs, hypodermic needles, and just trash in general. The island, if you can look past that, I think is pretty beautiful. It's an atoll that's atop of a volcano. It has a freshwater lake in the center of it that's just absolutely beautiful to look at.
But despite this natural beauty, the truth is that Clipperton is a dump. A neglected, ill-treated, polluted dump. Scattered years of occupation, shipwreck and ocean trash have taken their toll on Clipperton, with rusting hulks and filthy garbage littering the beach at almost every turn. By far the most devastated area is the old US military camp and ammunition dump, which was operational when Clipperton was illegally occupied around World War II. The then US President Franklin D. Roosevelt was obsessed with Clipperton as a strategic and potentially important base for American air and naval forces. Despite repeated personal trips to the island and numerous memos to his military advisors, Clipperton did not become the Trans-Pacific base he envisioned, and in fact caused major embarrassment when a huge troop ship ran aground here in 1944. Much of America's hardware still lies rusting in the sand, remnants of a secret operation the US military referred to as Island X. Thousands of mostly unexploded shells lie all over this campsite, 40mm and 20mm cannon shells, 50 caliber machine gun ammunition and much more. All of this was left behind when the Americans decided Clipperton was no longer necessary, and no one has since bothered or cared to clean it up. For such an island, bitterly disputed by so many nations over the last 150 years, a site like this says much about the owners. Because of its tiny size and lack of a lighthouse, Clipperton has seen more than its share of shipwrecks. These boats are relatively recent arrivals. From huge American Navy ships to small Mexican fishing boats like this one, the notorious Clipperton bad luck has struck many who came too close to this cursed island. Near the old American camp on the far eastern side is a peculiar hut constructed in the mid-90s by scientists working for NASA. Sent here to track and image the re-entry stage of an Ariane 5 rocket booster launched from French Guiana, the team spent 3 weeks setting up and constructing several large towers and equipment buildings. But their hard work in Clipperton's sizzling heat would come to nothing when, as bad luck would have it, the rocket was destroyed 25 seconds after liftoff due to a technical fault. Most of the towers and hardware were taken back, but the hut was left behind. Now covered in graffiti, undoubtedly from castaway Mexican and Costa Rican fishermen, the shelter probably came to some good use in providing protection from the elements until help arrived. Clipperton is like Grand Central Station for seabirds. Abundant food and easy nesting grounds far from the annoyances of human intrusion make this place popular with many of the Pacific's most common species. And aside from the thoughtless piles of old junk and the occasional 40-metre vertical, they generally have the place to themselves. One of the most abundant birds in March is the masked booby, the largest of the family, which can be found raising their chicks all over Clipperton this time of year. Called gannets in other parts of the world, the booby is said to have derived its name from the Spanish bobo, or clown, a name heaped on them by 16th century Spanish explorers who found their expressions and their loud, annoying squawks quite comical. Crabs and boobies seem to have developed a mutual understanding on sharing Clipperton Island. While the crabs are no match in size and generally don't bother the adults, small chicks and eggs are sometimes surrendered to the relentless crabs as consolation prizes. The fact that so many birds and crabs manage to occupy such a limited amount of land space is quite amazing. An extraordinary sight, especially at twilight. Growing young birds develop quite an appetite, and being a parent to one of these chicks is a full-time job until they learn to fly. With a mother keeping a watchful eye, crabs rarely pose a threat to any growing chick. But an abandoned bird is absolutely doomed. Abandoned chicks of this species are quite common, mostly the result of siblicide, where the stronger of the two siblings forcibly removes the weaker one from the nest, with no objection from the mother. Once abandoned, the baby bird will not last more than a day or two, and the omnivorous crabs will begin to draw near at the first sign of distress. They know that once the sun goes down, there will be no trouble overpowering the bird, just by sheer numbers alone. Eventually, the chick will be too weak to put up even a mild defense, and by nightfall, it will all be over. By daybreak the next morning, the pile-up is going strong as the crabs devour every last morsel that can be eaten, right down to the beak. Another species of this seabird family common to Clipperton is the brown booby, with its distinctive greenish-yellow feet. Just like its masked cousin, the brown booby faces the same daily trials with crabs, but in general prefers to spend more time perched above the fray. With long tails, long bills, and wings close to the torso, boobies are amazingly well-evolved divers. Special protective air sacs and closed nostrils protect these birds from high-impact blows and rushing water as they dive for food. The red-footed booby differs from its cousins in that it nests in trees and goes through a strange but beautiful colour morph from chick to adult. This colourful young bird, also the smallest of the gannet family, can be found nesting in the trees and ruins of Clipperton's largest coconut grove. The red-footed booby is also a common sight in the Galapagos Islands and most warm coastal regions of the Americas. Usually found roosting far up in the trees, the sinister-looking great frigate bird is another common resident of Clipperton. Also called a man-o'-war, this bird is easily the largest and toughest bird of prey on the island. As with many tropical seabirds of the region, its habitat extends all throughout the warm Pacific and Caribbean coasts and distant offshore islands like Clipperton, Cocos and the Galapagos. With a massive 3-metre wingspan and a comparatively compact body, the frigate is an aerodynamic master, having one of the highest wingspan to body size ratios of any bird on Earth. And since they are unable to land on water, the frigate has evolved into more of a pirate than a hunter, rather in character with Clipperton's dubious history. Their lightweight and forked tail allows them to easily outmaneuver most other seabirds. Aside from the occasional egg theft, crabs and frigates are generally not a threat to each other, and sometimes even a little help, as one small crustacean found out when looking for temporary shelter under this obliging bird. Male frigates are distinguished by a distinctive red sac below the throat, and females a red eye ring. A male's throat sac also becomes inflated during nesting seasons when trying to attract potential partners. A magnificent bright red beacon on an otherwise drab and evil-looking bird.
The Battle Creek Special antenna is here at the CW site and is being used exclusively for 160 meters. The States are loud all the time. Japan is loud. You know, it's just an all-water path between here and JA. And about an hour before sunrise here, and I had a JA pileup on 160, and some of those fellows were 20 over 9. Just unbelievable. Now in Atlanta, where my home is, there's probably 8 or 10 JAs, maybe as many as 15 or 20 that we work throughout a season. But there are a bunch of JAs on 160, and I'm telling you, in this part of the world, they're loud.
From here, we can work JAs for well over 2 hours on 160 meters. And propagation, due to the salt water environment, due to the low latitude, propagation is just fantastic, just unbelievable.
To some, 9 days is a very short time to be on Clipperton, and to others, just about as much as they can bear of this hot, uncomfortable place. Many a de-expeditioner and many a Clipperton castaway will tell you that comfort is not something often found on this wretched coral ring. 75,000 QSOs is a very respectable count, and certainly most of those who made an effort made it into the log on several bands. Such are the expectations of today's demanding DXs, expectations that would have been all but absurd even 20 years ago. With its dubious reputation and perilous approach, many consider Clipperton like an old haunted house, stalked by victims of murder and shipwreck that have yet to find peace. Others consider it a curse, with bad luck befalling all who dare to tempt fate by landing here. But optimists consider this island beautiful and untamed, both physically and on the airwaves, and are constantly drawn back here each decade by a feeling of adventure, a feeling perhaps that conquering Clipperton's curse is an achievement in itself. Faraway places, dangerous destinations, and the thrill of the pile-up. Such is what the magic of de-expeditioning is all about.